It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to today's session of Suitable Conversations at Sunder Nursery. At a suitable agency, our love for all things books is what inspired the idea for this series, and we are extremely grateful to Sunder Nursery for their enthusiastic support and encouragement in making this happen. Without their collaboration, this series would not have been possible. Now, for the event we've all been waiting for, Sarnath Banerjee and Amitava Kumar will be in conversation, discussing their unique and varied approaches to storytelling. But first, a few words about our speakers. Sarnath Banerjee has written 5 books of graphic fiction: Corridor, The Barn Owl's Wondrous Capers, The Harappa Files, All Quiet in Vikaspuri, and Doab Dil. In collaboration with historians, Sarnath has also produced Liquid History of Vasco da Gama for the Kochi Biennale and the Pune Circle for the Pune Biennale. His billboard series, Gallery of Losers, commissioned for the 2012 London Olympics, was widely displayed in East London. He has received fellowships from reputed institutions all over the world. He's had a fortnightly column with Mint Lounge and has also published a serialized piece with Jameel Arts Centre. Amitava Kumar is a highly acclaimed writer and journalist. His works include, among others, The Highly Celebrated Husband of a Fanatic and A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, as well as the widely lauded novel Immigrant Montana, published in India as The Lovers, which was also chosen among the best books of the year by both the New Yorker and the New York Times. He has been the recipient of numerous awards and writing residencies, most recently the Guggenheim Fellowship. He currently teaches at Vassar College, New York. As it happens, both Sarnath and Amitava have forthcoming books in the coming year. Sarnath is collaborating with Dr. Julia Hauser on The Moral Contagion, which is a visual history of humanity's response to various pandemics over time. And Amitava is bringing out The Yellow Book, which is a follow-up to his highly acclaimed The Blue Book. I'm very proud to admit that both these books are also represented by a suitable agency. And now, without further ado, please welcome our speakers with a round of applause.
So you arrived 2 days ago, so you're kind of still semi-jet lagged. And what are the ritualistic first few things that you do when you come to Delhi?
Achha, Delhi mein, the one good thing is that just as if you fall asleep, then and if you're jet lagged, you wake up in the middle of the night or early in the morning. But the good thing in Delhi is that many dogs in the neighborhood are already barking. So you feel that you're a part of a larger community and don't feel as alone as other jet-set travelers in the rest of the world are feeling.
Yeah.
Your solitude is robbed by this canine community. So that's good.
Well, dogs of Panchsheel kind of understand class though. I always get attacked. So I just have to be a little bit careful to kind of, hang around in neighborhoods which are more likely Shapur Jat and Malviya Nagar. Those dogs seem to kind of, don't bother me as much. But what about food? Like, aake first restaurant?
Because I have lots of nephews, etc. So I buy chocolate. I have bought it, as many people must do when they're traveling from these duty-free shops. So मैं खरीद के लाता हूँ, तो before I have given it to my nephews, I am the first consumer. Because if you wake up at night and these hotels, they allow you to have those little, tea के लिए रहता है, which you can make for yourself. तो वही sea salt वाली chocolate एक, for example, तो मैं सोचा कि इसको लेने.
तो आप होटल में रह रहे हैं?
हाँ.
अच्छा.
Park in Radisson. But I had made a mistake. मुझे निकलना पड़ा वगैरह but that's not.
Anyway, हाँ.
लेकिन मैं डायरी लिखता हूँ हर दिन, even when I'm traveling. तो वहाँ से हम लोग शुरू करें बातचीत about the diary part.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was getting to that. The multitude of sights and sounds and food and everything. And sometimes do you feel like that compels you to also draw some of these things? The sensual thing to do?
Do it this time. But one thing I've just recently adopted is an iPad. So if I'm writing, if I can do a drawing, then I've noticed that it just becomes a little bit more, it loosens me up a bit more, makes me a little bit more expressive. तो ठीक है, वही करता हूँ.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is because I think you either mentioned it or also I probably kind of figured it out that there's a strong dialogue that is happening with pure forerunners, John Berger, people who have spoken a lot about drawing and how it sort of slows down time, how you just can enchant a place just by like walking through a place slowly. अगर slowness को अगर आपको चाहिए तो drawing is a fantastic way to kind of acquire that slowness. And you report slowly, and that's why I'm sort of saying that you feel like a place which is such multitude of, I go to, my first thing is I have to go to Evergreen and have chole bhature. That's the first thing I do when I come back. And then Berger also said that when you draw, you acquire things. You become part of the thing that you're drawing. As opposed to like painting, when you paint, you acquire the things. But when you draw, you become part of it.
I must say that when I was writing my last novel, I have spoken about this elsewhere, and I just want to quickly share that I did think that if there was a picture of a photograph that was familiar to everyone of a lynching, for example. So if I was drawing it, and if there was an assault of news and fast news on you, and if you were drawing it, you were going to slow it down and have a different reception. And that the people who were looking at it, because you had removed something from the scene, would also have a slower... News wouldn't be absorbed at the fast rate at which it is thrown at us, but you would have retarded its progress in some ways so that you would have a deeper engagement or just something. So yes, that is how I think about drawing and stuff. Acha, because you were talking about arrival, यहाँ पे, I had come last time जब मैं दिल्ली आया, it was very, very hot. It was in May. And I had wanted to discuss one small thing, share something with you. Because in some ways we are writers, journalists, etc. And so I just read out a paragraph. Is that okay, boss?
Oh, absolutely.
So this was the first note I had made after arriving in the last time I was in Delhi. और I had written, इसको translate नहीं करूँगा madam, because ये अंग्रेजी में लिखा हूँ ग्रांटा में. और मजाक कर रहा हूँ, my God. In Delhi, the heat is chemical, something unworldly, a dry bandage or heating pad wrapped around the body. I sent a note to my friend Ravish, who was an anchor होना चाहिए उस समय जब चलो, who was an anchor on NDTV's popular Hindi show, Prime Time. I asked Ravish that if the Inuit supposedly have more than 50 words for snow, a specific word, for example, for snow used to make water, why don't we Indians have more words for heat? Ravish asked members of his audience to respond to this question. Words and phrases that Ravish and I didn't know, in a mix of Indian languages, came in from different cities and parts of the country, adding nuance and variety to what the newspapers were only calling a heat wave. Ravish concluded his monologue by saying that if you forget the many words for heat in your own language, you will also forget the names of your neighbors or the fact that people of two different religions used to live peaceably together. You will also forget why you are beginning to forget. तो ये जो टर्न थी ना, because our subject was ways of telling, मैंने निश्चय किया था कि भाई ये पहला जिक्र करूँगा कि I just said the way foreigners, NRI in particular, complain about the weather, कि ऐसा हो गया वैसा हो गया, connectivity बुरा है तो ये है वो है. I was just complaining of the heat, but I had a curiosity कि भाई बाकी हिंदी या बाकी भाषाओं में, in other languages from India, और क्या क्या शब्द थे. Now my memory is failing, but Ravi did that thing exercise and people then responded. Gujarati mein kuch. In fact, I had also asked, for example, even in places bound by land, and there was this idea of the sea being described in words by the people who had not actually seen the sea. I thought that was amazing too, because आपको अब याद है कि नहीं हमको नहीं पता है, लेकिन but ये सब आपके पास जवाब आया था. Okay. ways of telling me, I wanted to make the first point that the idea of speaking, Ravish, as an example, I just wanted to say, okay, this turn that takes place when he says, मैंने तो सब सिर्फ words मांगे थे, and people provided all these other words from other languages. Good. But this particular turn that he gave by saying, he concluded his monologue by saying that if you forget the many words for heat in your own language, you will also forget the names of your neighbors or the fact that people of two different religions used to live peaceably together. You will also forget why you are beginning to forget. तो मुझे ये बात ठीक लगी. I wanted that way of telling to be something that we could think about, where what is ordinary is given this turn or a twist to make it utterly relevant and urgent because of the conditions under which people are living. बात समझ में आ रही है ना? मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा वो.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I picked up from what you just said is the specificity, the specific and particularities. And I often struggle with that because having lived for several years outside Delhi and India, I find one of the worst, one of the toughest thing that I find is to make people understand particularities. जैसे कि आप heat का बात कर रहे हैं. Also try to tell people that, I mean, as I say to other people that, in Delhi people don't wake up feeling post-colonial. So it's kind of hard to justify that category in any kind of discourse. And also that the brown body doesn't necessarily have to be a body of anger and strife, but can be thinking about 45 ways to talk about different kinds of heat, square cheek heat, this heat, whatever. तो आपको कभी-कभी लगता है कि is this something, because I remember Patna, one of the joys of reading the book was its specificity. It kind of takes you there. It kind of creates the mahal, creates the atmosphere. And when you draw, you can recreate the atmosphere. You can create the tonality. You can create tonality. Of course, you can do it with words as well, but with less effort, you can kind of create those intelligently put together images, can create a sense of, I always use the word of, I mean, I'm a big fan of hauntology. Bhoot ka mera, I love ghosts, and I think it can create these sort of uncanny landscape, like some of your drawings, like particularly the Texas drawings, I mean, I find living in Europe relatively I find it sometimes a bit sterile, and I feel like one can re-enchant them with implanting those imagination. And I often find when I'm telling stories, I need words and images, perhaps both hands and feet, to actually get to that level of atmospheric understanding, which is why I'm just wondering, the Blue Book, was it that kind of a need that produced it, or yes, what were the operating factors?
I was writing a novel in which the narrator is interested in writing about fake news. But I don't know whether you guys necessarily also had the same experience, but where I was, the WHO put out this notice that along with the pandemic, there was the infodemic and spread of fake news. So I just thought how to start doing a little record where I would note down with every passing day, my diary would be one fake news about the pandemic. Okay? And that it should be accompanied by, because my children are small, I was thinking every day we would do a one paragraph writing, one drawing, was it? So I started that way. And then I started slipping into the mood of, there was so much sadness. So I thought, why not, when the New York Times started publishing obituaries, so I did cut out, and then I would paint over it, just to bring out some words, but also hide some things, to just promote this idea of the unsaid, or something. So वही वो एक mood सा बन गया. But what I want to say is, because you said the thing about writing and drawing, as everyone here will know, Sarnath is an amazing artist and writer, and I have not been an artist. But the reason why I want to put it in it is because I do want to cultivate or not hide the idea of failure also. That there should be defeats and people should stumble over that there should be imperfections of all kind, and that's okay. And तो मैं उस तरह से भी एक persistence, एक human practice को मैं persist करना चाहता हूँ, so that there is always a record of what the day feels like. और उसमें ड्राइंग का दिल किया तो ड्राइंग कर दिया, ड्राइंग में ना कुछ स्केच या कोलाज बना दिया, कुछ भी किया. Not because it will be worthy of being in a museum, but just because it tests my own creativity and expands something of my own feelings, emotions, sense of color, texture, tone, jo bhi.
Yeah, I think first of all, the skill, you can also be trapped in your skill as or any venture towards kind of developing like what is a good drawing. Nobody knows how to define it. Now, as you've seen, increasingly people are trying to kind of figure out a kind of a drawing that is very chalu. It kind of gets your thought out. It's like a map. It's like an indication. It's sort of wo phone. Abhi to log don't have these phone books. This sort of little scribbles that you make in phone books and trying to get to that level, that kind of the drawing being that sort of psychic aspect of drawing that you can actually, when you said that it's a history of feelings. It's like Niagara Falls के सामने Professor Kumar का picture दिया गया था on one Friday afternoon where everything seemed like something's going to happen but nothing's going to happen, but everything is joyful around that. Photo to hai, but photographs can't seem to like translate the amount of information that you were actually feeling. And so I find drawing, that's why there's a grand revival of drawing, but I'm not saying good drawing, but drawing that kind of takes you there. So it's basically what you're trying to say is that उस शाम को फोर्ट में last train miss करने के बाद, when you're walking around or you find yourself in a strange city, you're going to the bus stand like somewhere in southern Spain or something like non-touristy places, how did you actually feel during that particular period of time? I find it sort of somewhat simpler to kind of get drawing. Halaki, you have to, it's a bit like, it's a bit like, Ravindra Jain sitting with harmonium, banging out 70 tunes before he decides that, this tune is, because I'm constantly scared about writing tuneless comics, which often I do because, the tune, because I have to work with text and image both. And there's a lot of like, when you have to keep on doing till suddenly the kind of this mad tune enters, sort of, almost like that, like bridge, harmonium bridge in Piazza. I don't know whether you remember that, right? And that musicality of comics, what I do is something that we strive for and always fail. I still haven't reached, or maybe for 30 seconds, maybe half a page in one book, I've reached that tone, but otherwise it's just still trying to get there. I mean, with every book, it's trying to get there and not getting anywhere closer. But when I was reading Blue Book, I sort of saw that there's a tonal universe that you created. Well, you very successfully created the tonal universe. So, I mean, I think the purpose of the drawing, apart from the fact that they're indeed very beautiful drawings and paintings, I thought that you seem to have like got that sort of tone. I mean, a lot of writers I know draw, like they might not necessarily do a drawing. Ruchi draws, for example, regularly. He's got obsessive drawers. He fetishizes all these like nibs and pens and things like that. Sarovar Zaidi, academic, draws. Vikram draws. But somewhat bringing them all together into a form requires a little bit of a thinking. Main karunga ya nahi, because in like another territory. This jump, I think you wrote about it a little bit in the thing. You want to talk a little bit about that?
अच्छा, one thing I want to say to everyone is कि हम लोग यहाँ बैठे हुए ज्ञान दे रहे हैं ना. Anyone who will successfully remember or make sense of one thing will only be something that stays as an image. What I want to say, in other words, an early lesson that we acquired was somewhere V.S. Naipaul said something like, I only write in images, and people remember images, that sort of a thing. And formal बातें हम लोग कुछ भी करें, but if we do not cast it in a visual term, then you don't remember it. I was the other day talking to people in Jamia, and one student said, do you not think that if we are always taking down notes or thinking as writers, you're actually not living? तो मैंने सोचा इस बात पे, and I thought, when I walked up to the room after my mother died, and I went into the bathroom, I touched her body, and then I had gone up to the bathroom and I was washing my hand, and I thought this soap, I was telling the student that I thought this soap was the last soap my mother must have taken out, torn, and put there, and let me take out my notebook and write down that I have washed my hand with the soap that my mother must have taken out and put here, right? To write down that thing was just to remember that. सही? और मेरे कहने का मतलब ये भी है कि if I were now to say to you that soap that my mother had last used was in a blue plastic soap dish. तो ये blue plastic soap dish छोटी सी बड़ी बेसिक सी डिटेल है, but you will remember the blue plastic soap dish better than the few things I have said so far. Does that make sense to you? यानी कि I think I was coming with that idea जो शुरू में नहीं realize किया, बहुत पहले 10 साल पहले या 15 साल पहले, लेकिन अभी in this book I was thinking of those little details, and I think that is what it is.
But maybe a round of questions.
Actually, it's not a question per se, but since it's a conversation, I just wanted to talk about something, Sarnath, because I happened to pick up one of your books. I wanted to bring something for signing. So, luckily, it starts with gardens. And there's a beautiful chapter which you've written. And I must compliment the organizers for such a lovely setting today. I mean, you couldn't have had a more beautiful setting. So, this is for you as well as Amitava, because Amitava, you've done some beautiful sketches in Poughkeepsie of like the crows. I remember seeing you. So, can you share something about how much does nature really inspire you, or is it just another aspect of your writing? I mean, how much would you like to share something about gardens, especially this beautiful chapter you wrote about? I remember English gardens, and then since you had a Mughal garden sort of setting, and how much the Japanese, for instance, how they shape their garden, how much it tells you about the culture of a people, because you have a very beautiful broad worldview, especially in the Avdil.
Yeah.
Would you like to share something? And Amitava, you too, of course.
Yeah. वो तब एक garden का, so I got commissioned by Deutsche Bank to do a series of murals for their new office in London, and I'm still living on that money. That was like several years back. And तो बहुत बातचीत हुआ कि garden would be a Angrez garden, and I'd just come back from Algiers, where there's that garden, where first Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan was shot in this particular garden. I forgot what it was called. Dilip, do you know this name of this garden? But anyway, so I just come back from there, and part of it, half of the garden was English and half of the garden was French. The French one was very French, and the English was pretty wild. So, and then also Samuel Pepys had written extensively about the gardens and how it is a zaria, it is a way in which one could quite interestingly and understand the class system, and how gardening and appreciating a garden is in itself a way to show your culture and taste and tehzeeb and whatever. And also it has a very, a slightly frightening and a very haunted history of clearances in Scotland, because I also, before that, I was working in Inverness, and you hear about how vast areas were cleared up for people to hunt and, wander. And with that Jane Austen, where two people were, they Elizabeth and Darcy, who don't like each other, realize that their common interesting in gardening, or their understanding of the gardening brought them together. So it's also kind of a way in which one can class identify people. I'm a great fan of public gardens. I mean, my friend Hemant and I, we go for these long walks in this sort of Delhi. That way gives you, it's a hand that keeps on giving in terms of gardeners, and you can't just stop. Mane, ऐसे वाले afternoon में you can't stay at home. Obviously, you have to be out. The joy, I'm sure it does amazing things for my mental health. Of just, it will become a ritual. So this garden has been very close to. But I don't have a green thumb. Everything dies in my hand. So bana garden mein, I'm the person who would enjoy it the most, and of course, being in a city which has, I mean, I also, that I was very interested in the Persian understanding of garden and the Mughal understanding of garden. And if you read some of the new Mughal books, like Parvati Sharma's books on Akbar and Jahangir, you see that how close this city is linked to the idea of the garden, and I just find that delightful. So I'm very happy that when I got the right, just got the right thing. It's about gardening, walking, and libraries. Sorry. Right. Thanks for the question.
Nirupma mentioned this book, Doab Dil, by Sarnath Banerjee. I had seen Sarnath's work before, and I had read All Quiet in Vikaspuri. Only yesterday, I bought Doab Dil, and I think it's a most amazing book. It's like a garden itself, actually. You might have killed plants, but here you have brought a garden together in its arrangement and style and surprise. Idiosyncratic book. In a garden, someone might lay out in an arrangement that is pleasing to them certain flowers and plants and ferns. And what Sarnath has done here is that he has selected books that are odd and attractive in their particular ways, and then he has just done drawings and little reflections on them. So it is both itself a recommendation for other books, and it is a book to be recommended. So I want to... And Doab Dil. What a great conception too. दो word बताओ यार लोग Doab Dil, so that you can please her also, because
but I still don't know exactly why I called it Doab Dil, but of course Doab Dil, Indo-Gangetic Doab, and fertile area of thoughts. And I was reading A.J. Baker that time, who wrote this amazing book called The Peregrines, where the amount of sensibility and emotion that he could bring through peregrine basically I was very interested in that time of reading non-homocentric books, in the sense where the peregrine become, it's not H for hawk, which is primarily, hawk is a way to talk about one's own, the person's own grief and this thing, but peregrine on the other hand is entirely focused on these two birds. And और उसमें इतना there was so much sentience, I don't hate to use that word, but there was so much life in the way that person depicted through non-human situation. I just found that absolutely choking. So Doab Dil, it was beyond the humanity part of it. It was geography and the fertility and the things and the objects and the places and the setting that kind of got me into that area. And then it is and also because it's a place of cross fertilization of we often forget, most people forget that Delhi is you're sitting in a city which is like no other city in terms of the things that Damascus, perhaps closer Cairo maybe to an extent, but maybe erstwhile Aden or unka to mir or frankincense ka business hota, to Yemen was probably another place where, but this is where we are. And Nizamuddin, imagine the deep dark beautiful heart of Delhi, which is the and just reading reading Narayani, and then after that, even Khushwant Singh's Delhi, which I love. Can I say that? Which is just this, much before all this sort of politics of like gender fluidity, he had a girlfriend who, or a boy, or someone, or and the way he comprehend. So yeah, it's Doab, Delhi, North India, all like jalebi and rabri for him, me, and I just put it all together. It's I mean, it's hard to talk about one's book though, but anyway.
No, but you must, because one of the things about, if we are discussing ways of telling, then the sort of sensibility that Doab represents is a very cosmopolitan. It is not a narrowly nationalist idea of beauty. It is an idea of beauty that draws on sources from different nations. And so there is this confluence. What you were celebrating about Delhi's identity, yes, there's a confluence, is right here, in this book. So that I liked. One thing I wanted to ask you, I think Ritesh's book also ends with Water Wars, if I remember right, his novel, yeah? And one thing I wanted to ask you about the Vikas Puri book is the lovely playfulness you bring to it. Jaise ki even when the gangs war starts, all the gangs have these crazy, wonderful names, Jaise ki, the guns of Ghantakar, Bullar's War, Khurana's List, Batora, 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 the siege of INA Market, Justice Bipin Bose, the butcher of Safdarjung. Oh, that word makes me think. Osama bin Laden is dead, but the butcher of Safdarjung lives. And is firing shots. Anyway, so ये playfulness वाली जो बात है ना?
Yeah.
The absolute commitment to laughter, or comedy, or the comic, playful, in that playfulness at the level of language and at the level of the image. इसके क्या source है, क्या sources हैं, और क्या है उसमें, what do you see, or what do you, how pleasurable you find it, उस पर थोड़ा सा discourse कीजिए.
I mean, I both of us live in a geography which we probably have an acquired taste, and that's why we have to live there because of either job, in my case, a child, and there is all this sort of there's all these like little like sensibilities, that day-to-day sensibilities that we miss every now and then. I'm sure you get assailed by this one afternoon in I don't know, like you're just coming back home in Calcutta, and then sort of and you kind of try to recreate that in another one. Basically, there's a lot of desire. So they All Quiet in Vikas Puri is a book of desire. It's like you want to like devour a city. मतलब खा लूँगा चबा चबा के, so neighborhoods of Delhi, because I walk endlessly and continuously in whichever city I am. And I've never been to Vikas Puri, but I've actually been to all other places around Vikas Puri. I probably would go to the neighborhoods of Delhi. So you have Panchil trying to create its own nuclear reactor. I mean, Ruchi's book had the water wars, and I just like took it like another at the when I completely there's at the center of the narrative is Girish the psychic plumber. I learned Hindi from a plumber. My brother learned Hindi from a plumber, to the point that I overheard him telling the plumber कि देखो इतने अच्छे से plumbing कर देना कि बाद में कोई गंडगोल ना हो. So amazing Hindi we speak thanks to our plumber. Sorry about the language hierarchy, but so in the middle of all that, there's a psychic plumber who has been assigned this job to kind of find this mythical river, which Saraswati, which I think is not mythical anymore. They probably found scientific. This book is not a work of fantasy anymore. It seems like everything is kind of happening. I'm sure there's a commission, and I just wanted to write the sort of specificity of the neighborhood. वो बात वही पे आ गया ना, वो how many words for eat. You said it like in the first sentence also, that the particularities of the joys and the spoils of living in this society, I was telling Himali, our agent and old friend, that even the cringe, the joys, the beauty of like living in a cringe society, jahan pe cringe also kind of create this sort of a strange beauty that, I mean, I personally learn more things from things that I don't like than things that I like. Because, things that you like is multidimensional. But things that you don't like, it's the most specifically you can say that मुझे ये पसंद नहीं है, and then you don't want to be like that. So all the things that you don't like should also be there. So short-termism is a very strong part of this. कि आज का देख लेते हैं, बाद में देखा जाएगा क्या होगा. Whichever, and you have to see all this with joy and like love. So Vikas Puri is like this kind of. I think all of us do it, right? We're all kind of trying to. When I was in your books also, it's just like it's a basic. There's a band in DJ in Delhi now. They're in Goa. They call themselves basic love of things. Blot. I think very basic love of things. You just sort of keep on putting it all together and try to kind of make sense of it. And that's.
One thing I wanted to ask you, and I wanted maybe people can share some views on that, is that Facebook या Instagram पे हम लोग सभी we are diarists of some sort. सब लोग those media serve as diaries. वैसे उस रोज की report, someone is shaking her head there. You're like, no, I don't do that on Facebook. I'm like, but you know what I'm saying. And I think I wanted to ask you, कि ये क्या सही नहीं है कि not just social media, in fact, ignore social media for a moment, in the work that you do, are we not in some ways just trying to keep a diary of, and not of ourselves, though that is a part of it, but of society? कि भैया, what was it like to be alive at this moment? Yeah, ऐसे कुछ? There was a talking of Facebook, एक दिन Facebook पर मैंने पढ़ा, वरिंदा ग्रोवर जो यहाँ पे ह्यूमन राइट्स लॉयर हैं, शाहीन बाग के समय she had said to the protesters there, keep a record, don't trust the state, don't expect the police to document the violence it is raining on your head, you have to do this yourself, note it down. तो मुझे तो लगा कि what she was asking also is that everyone keep a diary. Okay. And then a part of it is that if you do keep that diary, not only do you have evidence of what is happening in around you or to you, but you will be able to maintain your sanity maybe. Or is that too far-fetched? What do people think? Or what do you think?
I mean, before we get a response from people, which I would love to hear from what people think. Ita did write a graphic novel, a comic book, a reportage comic book, very well put together, very writing from the middle of everything, not an observational, cool, analytical understanding of an empirical understanding of rights. She wrote actually. She's not here. I can't see her, but she just did. It's on Shine Bag, Ita Malhotra. It's I can find you the book, but that's a fantastic record of Shine Bag, and it was published by Yoda Press, I think. Anyway, so people are graphic novel people in India, because we don't have a baggage of graphic novel or comics like in America. We have that specificity of not coming from like Biradri, like any kind of dynastic comic book writing. So everybody has like figured out their own form. There's no great Robert Crumb kind of like situation, or no like sort of people to kind of follow, or people have followed Western. When I was coming to see there were you often take examples of Art Spiegelman and all that, and put somewhere down the line. Most of the comic book thoda surfera hota hai. They are fairly independent people. Over a period of time, created their own language and dynamics in the way they understand the country, the city, their individual position in a collective consciousness. Let's put it that way. I'm using this word just because. But so and therefore the heterogeneity that the comic book world produces in India is fantastic. Just the problem is that it's too specific to be out in the Western world, because I know what kind of requirements that you have to fulfill to kind of satisfy a a Western comic book publication that they have to sort of, this is something that you have to fulfill. Like, आप लोगों ने, you have crossed that, in last few years, you've crossed that hoop, but graphic novels still existing within those same it has to be, it's usually that apart from the dominant narrative that is around, you have to be somehow checklist. Like, I mean, Marjan turned out to be wonderful, but she came in as a checklist. She fitted into the right kind of, so abhi Ukraine ka chal raha hai. But, before it was like, maybe there was a lot of African comic book writers coming in. So you have to so I'm actually amazed and very happy and extremely proud of the kind of narrative that the current generation of comic book writers are coming out with. Cool. We can open up again.
Let's do that. Let's ask. I mean, do you think... I rather think that instead of necessarily a new novel about some unlikely theme, if there could be a book that would be a scrupulous account of what is happening every day, just choti. Like Svetlana Alexievich's work, Voices from Chernobyl, if there could be the purity of the human voice, many voices, just recounting कि उस पर उस दिन क्या बीती, what happened to that person that day or something like that. So that would be a collective diary or a public diary. मुझे लगता है
I found that in your book because while we are waiting for a question, Amber, I'm just asking.
I thought you were waiting for a response to your question.
Yeah.
So just to give this some sort of structure, because we need to get back to the conversation, let's take 3 responses from the audience now.
So question to both of you, because it's called ways of telling. For Sarnath, your medium is art, but you also know what you want to say. So like in music composition, does a line spark a page or does an image spark the fiction? And then you do something that as an originator of art is you do wide angle, but you also close up. But Amitava has a certain distance to the art form. There's a distance view to how you see what you've drawn. It's either through the window or you're traveling, or there's a distance between you and the first point of that focal length. So do you first write before you draw, or have you drawn to record and then write behind it?
Made it. Good question.
Are you going to respond to that, or?
Well, are we taking 3? No.
Question by question, or would you want to take all 3 questions first?
All three.
Okay, I'll remember that. It's a very nice question. I will.
No, but they prefer to take the questions first, so.
Yeah,
Actually, one sec. Just can you wanna? But we can. Maybe I might forget. So can we just? Yeah. Okay. So
just as well.
You start.
Yeah.
Boss, because my livelihood comes from writing. I have asked of my students also that they should write 150 words every day. So it's a promise to myself. तो मेरे बच्चे जब स्कूल जाते हैं तो उसके बाद मैं लिखना शुरू कर देता हूँ. And if I think that if I'm tempted to draw something, which sometimes I am, because how on Instagram, for example, someone's feed will come and you see a lovely painting and you think, यार मैं भी जरा कोशिश करता हूँ कुछ. But then I think, no, don't be tempted. So I always first write. And if I'm even thinking about a painting that would go or something, I just want to wait. So खाना वाना बना के फिर then I do that. So it's a stupid discipline thing. कि नहीं मैं पहले लिखूंगा 150 वर्ड कम से कम हो जाएं, and there's a feeling of otherwise so it's not the most artistic response in the sense that I don't feel, but
But Riyaz is a very important part of artistic this thing, like where you orient yourself into which is you're sensitive to it does not come as a text or image. It comes like a vague sensibility. It could be like getting back to that whole Bapilari is not writing the music first and then his original score first, and then he is playing the original score. sometimes he's writing a little bit, फिर उसको piano और जो भी harmonium में बजा के he's sort of trying it all out. So there's a lot of trying of, it's like foundry. You're like lot of stabs at trying to get the tonal universe. This is Anand, I'm also lying while I'm saying this, because sometimes you just want to make life easy for you. You just put together some drawings and writing. And when I was writing my column, for example, those were the this thing. But ideally, situation is that you make many different drawing and text combinations, and it's like a composition. It's like a music composition. It works. Often it does not work. Once or twice it does work. And then you draw, and then the drawing also got 5 drafts. 5-6 draft ke baad, you think it is getting somewhere, then you realize that the first draft was the best. Then you have to go through the angst of that, this whole Judeo-Christian guilt of like, 5 draft karne ke baad, why do I go back to the first draft and go to the most minimal stuff that I did? So these are also confidence, because we all tend to overwrite a bit. There's a performative element to most writers that we have to somehow control it. And uske liye this what Amitava is saying, also Riyaz kind of a thing. You have to, मैं भी बच्चे को स्कूल में takes over 40 minutes to take him to school. We have to change one train to get him to school, and on my way back from school, I already start working in the train itself with notebooks and all that. So there's a notebook situation. Then when you're making cooking for him later, raat ke liye, then also you're like kind of making a few more drawings. But sitting and working is something which is a luxury these days. But I try to do it like twice or thrice a week, where I sit down and then the whole thing get assembled together, and then you realize that nothing worked. All that was useless. So this is also a problem. And but yeah, good question.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the question you raised about diary writing and sanity, and also raise a question in regard to that. So I completely agree that this for idea that we have been trying to keep a diary of sorts, and this idea that every day we should be writing something, recording the ordinary from this individual point of view. Because at least personally, what I feel is, and I felt this viscerally a few weeks ago, and I'm a student in JNU, and this recent case of vandalism happened where some students wrote something on the walls of our building. And the first news that came about it was from my father, who was watching the news about it. And then I was trying to process it as a student who is right there, trying to think about what is happening and the kind of conversations that students there are having. My roommate, for instance, or people like my professors. And I felt that, in some ways I was trying to, so usually what happens is an event happens and you try to look for narratives to understand it. That is how I go about it. So you go and see what happened. You try to understand it through some news, for instance, or you try to read a book around it. But this idea of, ordinary people recording what actually happened makes me think, how in some ways it allows me this activity of rewriting to just keep sanity of what happened, not from somebody else's perspective, which sometimes I can't understand, but from my own perspective, to just make sense of that this event happened. I am part of it, and I'm trying to think through what happened. I'm not able to capture it fully, but it is not like a news item or a journalistic piece. It's just me jotting down 3 or 4 things about what happened, what kind of conversations are happening, what I think about the things that were written on the walls, and those kind of things. And in regard to that, I wanted to ask Amitava about, in the earlier half of the conversation, you were trying to talk about how the ordinary needs to be foregrounded as something relevant and urgent, for instance. And you also talk about writing every day. So I wanted to ask if, this activity that you want people to engage in is something where you think that, everybody writes, but also writes because it has relevance for everybody else. And, people end up writing because it turns out to be an archive of sorts. If you could respond.
Yeah, my attempt was to say that as civic life is becoming more impoverished or narrower, कि अगर everyone participates in this act of trying to record and build up an archive and respond to it. So it will actually be generative of some sort of broader community feeling, ऐसा कुछ मुझे भी लगता है ना कि in an atmosphere of violent polarization where saying anything meaningful gets you a volley of abuse, for example, then in that context, how to just fight off despair even, how to keep a record. Well, there is a film by these folks that some of us know, Rux, called Strikes Time, ऐसे कुछ title है. Does anyone know this? And there is a worker from Faridabad, I think, who several decades ago just keeps a record of how much he has spent on train fare, so how much spent on a film or oil or a quart of whiskey, and each day he ends baki sab sadharan, and somehow it becomes a really sublime message, Jiki, and gives you a sense of that time. And I think, I mean, why, someone, Ravish providing a daily monologue at the night was a diary, and a diary in which people then found entry because they would see their lives being made sense of in a certain way and their day's events being framed. What does a frame do on a picture? When a frame is put on a picture, it outlines something, draws it into relief, and that is what writing about it is able. A way of telling where you are framing the day's events in a narrative is giving shape to the day, some certain. So, I was trying to say that if we all did that, I was just responding to the Vrinda Grover thing, first of all. I thought, ye to karna chahiye bhai. Also, I'm sorry to say, or to sound very depressing, if a lynching has happened on Tuesday, and then there is another lynching on Thursday, or another act of violence on Friday, you forget which day what happened and what was the name of the victim. So, kam se kam, just to keep that alive. One example I'll give, which I always talk about, is, in America, in the same way as the video of a lynching is the most depressing thing here, in America, it is the killing of black men. And I bought a book called Citizen by Claudia Rankine, and on one page it said, for example, on the right side of the page it said, because the police lack imagination, white men are killing black men, something like that. And on the left side was a list of the people who had been killed. When I bought my issue, my copy, there was a few names. But when I bought a copy for my daughter when she went to college, the names had increased. And I thought that book of poems then became a kind of a memorial and were therefore transformed into testimony. So, agar hamari kitabein, what we write becomes that kind of testimony, then I think it enriches our life, our political life at least. So actually, given that we only have about 10 minutes or so left, can we open it out for more questions? Because there are some people here. I'll come there later. First of here.
So I wanted to ask a question to Amitava, and I'm just sitting here. So I am currently reading a book of yours. I haven't completed it yet, right? But I have read numerous interviews of yours and watched it also, the one with Ravish Kumar as well. And you say this numerous times in the interviews that you can't save the world, but you must record it, like you were talking about recording. And I was really impressed by the idea of diary writing also, and I feel that I've tried to inculcate it. But what I feel that while we are trying to record things and while we are trying to make sense of it, as the fellow gentleman said, aren't we also trying to save the world through it? Right? And what is the motive or objective of doing it, of recording it? And what do you mean by the fact that you can't save the world and then you should record it? So, a little bit on that.
I think it was just a modest gesture. Ki bhaiya, I'm not going to save the world. Wo wali baat. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was very much, I very much admire people like, let's say, Omar Khalid, who is in prison for his commitment to social justice and national well-being. as I understand it. ठीक है? So I think he's trying to save the world. I'm not, and that's why probably I'm not in jail. But I should do from, coming from an artistic angle, I thought my contribution could be that I ask him, and so I sent a letter through his lawyer. Dear Umar, I heard that you're reading books in prison. What are the last books you have read? And he sent me a list of 100 books. ठीक है? And I am serving a certain very small role in just recording the names of the books he has read. So that people, and coming at it from that oblique angle, it just becomes a way of reminding people about Umar Khalid. And that he's human. And that he's reading books. So I would love to meet, that I live so far away, but that the news that came during the pandemic of the death of Natasha Narwal's father, and how we got to watch the father's pride and sorrow. And it was, I think, extremely tragic. So I would like to come, I would like to record her name, her interests, what the father thought, what happened to him, what pride he had in his daughter, just as a way of saying that this happened in our country, that there was this person, and that he had this love, and that this girl had this fight in her, has this fight in her, etc. How many of you have seen this new documentary called All That Breathes? You can't say it, but it was going to come. And I urge that, in the same way as we are recommending books or titles, I want to urge everyone to watch Shaunak Sen's All That Breathes, because the entry of the political also is so oblique in just the right way. You think of it as something that is about life. You think of it as कि भाई वो तो चील को खाना देते वो चील के बारे में. मगर what you understand is that it's about life itself. It's about you, and it's about the human, and keeping something human alive. And so I want to urge that. I don't know whether I'm answering you, but that's... So there seem to be a lot more people who want to ask questions, so we're going to try and accommodate as many of them as possible. I'm doing it in order of whoever asks, so please be a little patient, guys.
Can you be quiet? I don't want to take you away from the subject you were, but to get away from it, I was recently traveling through the Sinai between the Egypt, Jordan, Palestine. I was wondering all that, Abraham, why have all the shepherds been born here? And when you're going through it, you see there's something about the landscape. It's not sand, it's not mud. And there's a constant play of shadows and sun, and the way the sun it's constantly moving. And yet, I was wondering, what is it that makes it such a theater of the gods? And I couldn't find the word for it to write it in my diary. And a few days later, I'm reading Amit Chaudhary's How a Piece of Music Affected Him, like these gilded shafts of light appearing out of all over. And I thought, yeah, that was the feeling. So my question is, जब आपको loves नहीं मिलते, तो कहाँ ढूंढते हैं? क्या खाते हैं?
Sarnath is saying I can't give a very interesting answer to that wonderful question. So we are, but not only for that, we're just going to take more questions, and yeah.
मुझे लगा कि आपको आवाज़ आ रही है. So mine is more of a response. So I think first I really appreciate the topic, because there's a lot of conversation about a book someone has written or a film. But the whole creative process, like you said, the student asked you a question that if you're writing, are we actually living? So I think first I feel that the whole art of writing a journal, I see it as a catalyst to art. Because I believe that एक बार आप वो लिख लेते हो तो you know कि अच्छा this is what I'm feeling and thinking, my anger or whatever, like whatever's happening in life, like some problem, finance, whatever, that's out of the way. And you can start the day with actually getting to the craft. And secondly, I feel like just the knowledge of ideas, because I personally feel like, I was lucky enough to go to colleges where I could, read ideas, say, by John Berger, ways of seeing. But if I sitting at home or, I'm working in a very rational setup, I think just having access to ideas helps you deal with it. So
now that I know the concept of alienation by marks, something is happening, or maybe say a colleague doesn't have time for me, I know, okay, fine, this is alienation from other people. I don't know anything about myself. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling alienated from myself, or like Judith Butler said that gender is a performance, so people are not letting you talk in meetings, even if you have a valid point. You're like, okay, fine, So I just feel like this whole, I feel like art is very urgent, which is something that we don't realize because it doesn't have the same importance like the job of a plumber who's coming and fixing a tap. So that's why I feel like the whole aspect of journal writing, which also I think someone said that, are you also prescribing it to your students because of the social relevance? So I'm very sure that any artist starts with journal writing before they get to a manuscript or they get to a film or they get to anything. So yeah, so I think that urgency of it and as a way to also overcome your reality, I think that's a very, very powerful tool. Thank you so much, Mazrat. But I think the act itself, your talk has actually just woken me up to the reality कि जब हम हिंदुस्तानी भी बोल रहे हैं, that's an act of remembering. Because at one level, we have forgotten and subconsciously. So my question was actually, आपने जब डायरी लिखने का और हम जहाँ बैठे हैं उस जगह पे एक remembrance के लिए थोड़ा सा वो है. So I was remembering, firstly, just want to say one little thing. I think you brought it up, that Percival Spear has written that Delhi was a Weimar, Weimar Republic. Delhi was a Weimar and Ghalib was its Goethe. So I think हम भी remember कर रहे हैं अपने Goethe को. I just realized this while you were both talking. So thank you for that insight. So my question is, in the subcontinent, do you think, if you look at the mutiny, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of diaries of Brits, officers, junior soldiers, wives of soldiers, that this happened today at Kashmiri Gate. I went and had my tea, but the cup broke because the soldiers shot at us. But you will hardly find any accounts, except some rare ones, say by Ghalib, this Dastanbu, which is his diary. And then, of course, we jump to Bhagat Singh, who wrote his diaries. But there is, I think, that has contributed, and I don't know what is the cultural reason for that. Just as an example, I'm taking the mutiny. Hundreds and hundreds of Brit officers and seniors, Sleeman, Falana, I mean, everybody was writing about the mutiny. But हमारी तरफ से जिस पे perpetrate हो रही, हमारा शाहजहानाबाद था जो बर्बाद हो रहा था, उसमें you'll find one Ghalib, you'll find Zaid, there'll be one or two other people, और जिसकी वजह से आज I saw a very disturbing thing which I'll just end with, जो आपने visualization का जिक्र किया है. Instagram has created this image of visuality. तो अब अगर आप शाहजहानाबाद जाएं और whatever, this is the city of Inqilab Zindabad mutiny, but वहाँ की image बन गई है कि करीम्स हैं वहाँ, कबाब्स हैं वहाँ, शादी की shopping होती है. It's been sort of trivialized with the act of forgetting. And now the reverse is happening, that I recently saw some freedom fighter families whose own ancestors were killed in 1857, who were associated with Bhagat Singh. But Instagram influencers who are 25 or 30 years old are sitting with these old gentlemen standing like courtiers because उनकी remembrance बिल्कुल take over हो गई है. Instagram पे एक फोटो लगा दिया आपने जामा मस्जिद के आगे, आप शाहजहानाबाद के एक्सपर्ट हैं कल से, आपको 2000 लाइक्स मिल गए, टुडे यू आर द वॉइस ऑफ शाहजहानाबाद. और जो जनाब एक शहीद के बेटे हैं, भगत सिंह के कुलीग के वो हैं, nobody even knows that gentleman. So I was just thinking, do you think it's some sort of a subcontinent thing that we didn't even remember events like the mutiny? We have to read William Dalrymple to find those, which I think is laudable. But Dalrymple brought it back to us, I think, and I have no qualms in saying that. So that was my question.
My question perhaps moves away a little bit from the diary, or not. It's just something that I have experienced as well in my life, but I know that the two of you spend a lot of time fluctuating between the West and India, you know. Like Amitava अमेरिका में रहता है, फिर यहाँ आता है, फिर दिल्ली से फिर वो बिहार जाता है, वापस जाता है. Sarnath comes from Berlin, comes to Delhi, complains about Berlin, then he goes to Calcutta and complains about Delhi and Berlin, and then he comes back and continues. My serious question is, when you're writing or when you are drawing or when you're thinking, does the shift of location come in the way of your flow of thinking? Does it give you some sort of a fillip when you fly and come and change location, or both? how does it work because I found it quite difficult. If I was in London for a while and I came back to India, it took me a while to adjust. And if I was having a conversation with myself in Europe or in London, that conversation suddenly seemed irrelevant or difficult to continue here. And vice versa, when I would go from here to the West, suddenly मैं वहाँ जो घर पे सोच रहा था, वो मतलब थोड़ा अजीब सा लगने लगता है. Do you feel that? How do you handle that? In your ways of telling or your ways of working with yourself, or even in a diary, there's a diary shift texture or the drawing shift texture.
So the first question was about what do you do when you don't have the words? And I think your response to it in some ways in dialogue with that was that there are actually some words that you have acquired. For example, let's say via Judith Butler or Berger or whoever. And I think the third contribution about that about the forgetting, all of these are about the inadequacies of language sometimes. Sometimes inadequacies that are designed and sometimes inadequacies that are just accidental. But it is about the inadequacy of language to create a certain reality that is complex. And I think the point, and I'll come to Ruchir's in a minute, is that मेरी तो कोशिश रहती है हमेशा कि I actually stress the limits of my articulation. यानी कि मैं एक बात कह रहा हूँ. I mean, for all if I follow my advice from the beginning, the visual scene, imagine yourself when you were saying to someone that you loved them. You probably thought, and Himalaya is now looking at someone she had once said, or maybe he at least heard said from the other side, I love you. So take it, you probably thought that your saying something was quite adequate. But if the other person had even left you with the slightest trace that your words were not finding their mark, then you realize that what you are saying is not adequate. समझ रही हैं बात? Which of course was my recurrent experience, but we will not talk about that. What I'm trying to say is that I always try to write in a way, even in my diary, where I do want to think कि हमें भाषा है, हमें कोई शब्द है, लेकिन I have some language, but I don't also have a complete language, that I am indeed forgetting. That if I do not, इसीलिए that's why I started with that paragraph which was in conversation with Ravish, where I said that if you forget, because it was about how we are forgetting. We do forget. And then how to remind oneself about that. समझ रही है ना? अब भाई साहब जो बात कर रहे थे, I always do think that newness, that transversal, that moving into a different space is an instigation into trying to think how is this different. तो मैं तो थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा alert हो जाता हूँ. For example, every time I go to a new place, मैं जानता हूँ कि आप Instagram को थोड़ी सी लखेड़ दी है वहाँ पर, जैसे बिहार में कहते हैं, लेकिन तो अगर नए शहर में जब जाता हूँ तो मुझे लगता है हमेशा कि मैं Instagram में ज़्यादा फोटोज अपलोड कर रहा हूँ, बिकॉज वन इज सीइंग विद तो रुचिर को मैं ये कहूँ कि मैं डिसलोकेशन से मुझे तो ज़रा थोड़ा सा फ़ायदा होता है. जैसे मैं गाँव गया तो मैं सोचता हूँ कि भाई हाउ इज दिस डिफरेंट रियली, how is the texture of life and what I'm seeing different. So that's how I respond. Begin up, I have taken enough time.
No, this was the finding language, or when language is not coming or whatever. That's a very interesting question whose answer I don't have, but I'm also constantly exploring that world. But Ruchi's thing is it's an immediate problem of moving between, because I have to constantly think of can I recreate that balcony that I have in mind? Practical problems, or can I sort of produce that bit of architecture or a hardware store, that because I have to constantly recreate them. Whether I have a lot of problem recreating Karachi, for example, because it's a city very much inside my head, but I haven't been there in so long that I can't recreate them. And all these references that are available, I'm giving a very practical answer, not for this one. Delhi, I think a dislocation has its. I always thought that this is like some bakwas that you need to be dislocated to kind of look at things with an added focus. You see things with enchantment. You see things more clearly. You see it in with more cosmopolitan eyes. Somehow you explain in this whole process of explaining things. There's a lot of people, a lot of South Asians, they're very annoyed when they have to explain that. And a lot of early Indo-Arctic literatures are explanation literature, where there's always like a need to explain context, and that's very annoying. But while I'm annoyed by it, I'm also interested in the fact that I'm not anymore in my comfort zone with my friends who would kind of understand my half sentences. Here, in Delhi, I don't say full sentences. I say 2-3 words too. People usually get it. Well, they would run away if I speak in full sentences. 3-4 sentences, they just generally get it. But वहाँ पे you have to explain, so there's an added effort. It's also like the same way people find it difficult to talk about their own work, and I think I was telling a friend of mine that you really must know how to talk about your own work, even though it's esoteric, even though it's all happening in your head. You don't know how to talk about your work. It's all some phantom. It exists in some phantom space, which is very hard to articulate. Partly articulating it is part of the work, because then you're involving the other person to talk about. So in similar ways, I think it's the same for me when I go to where I live now in Berlin. I feel I have to explain my context a little. It annoys me. It really annoys me how to tell people, because there's a lot of there's something called there's a lot of sea lining. That means basically you explain the same thing again and again and again, but the person will ask you the same question. It used to happen to people like, when you go to England, you'd have that, how come you're English? How can you speak in English and all that? So after like giving long conversation, after like half an hour, the person will still say, your English is very good. So this is something that happens a lot when you're away, and you get tired of it. Frankly, you can't. Sea lining. Sea lining is a bit like my father, who taught management, said that in corporate world there's something called the Great Dodge, or the Haile Selassie method, which means when an enthusiastic intern comes to you and very enthusiastically tries to tell you their idea about how to improve certain thing, and you're not interested in it, you just have to look at the place between the eyebrow and the hair for about 30 seconds, and the person will get lost in their own conversation, and that is called the Haile Selassie look, which is Haile Selassie never looked straight at people. He look always. Also, he was small, which small people are very small. Yeah, more visual images, like being small people, you generally end up looking somewhere there. I mean, I have experiences. I also like hugs. Basically, for me, are being thrown between armpits to armpits. So it's like William Dalrymple's armpit to Sudeep Sen's. So this is like my Delhi situation. So there are all these issues. But anyway, so you kind of go away, and I think you do, although it annoys you, but it also tells you that, look, boss, the world is not just your like 5 yaar dost, and they get your thing immediately. You have to somehow learn to kind of, and that kind of makes you a little more kind and empathetic to readers, and you don't become part of that club that Delhi is infamous for, that they only speak to each other, that sort of stuff, Yeah.
Now, so over to Amber. How are you doing? Time vagara, people are running out of time, but there are some more questions. I'm answering this lady's earlier question, which was about memory and remembering. She seemed to think that I had forgotten her question about forgetting, but it was.
My name is Prithvi, and please forgive me. I came here late, and I don't know what I'm going to ask has already been discussed. But you were talking about archiving things, keeping a diary. Now, I find it quite relatable, but the dilemma that I find myself in while preparing a chronicle of, let's say, a political event even, I'm always questioning myself that, am I just being too full of myself while writing about it? Or am I just writing about it plainly and there's not me there anywhere? The problem is that the things that I choose to write upon, or the things that I keep my focus on,
I'm concerned that would the reader think it as important, or would the reader think that it was relevant for this chronicle? I'm not a journalist, and I'm not trying to be a writer. My allegiance is with preparing a chronicle where I managed to keep my phantom presence intact while giving a great description of what happened from my eyes. But how do I achieve that? How do I maintain that balance between being myself and writing about what exactly happened?
The question for Amitava, I read in the blue book that you'd written that you're almost forgetting Hindi, your connection with Hindi, Bihari, but it doesn't look like that at all.
कहो रवीश कुमार किन्ने पढ़ा आप तो भोजपुरी भी भूल जाते हैं ना थोड़ा थोड़ा हिंदी because we don't get the practice of speaking. Because after my grandmother died, I was not able to write in Hindi. There was no need to write letters in Hindi anymore. But now, thanks to the magic, I'm sorry to be saying this, thanks to the magic of the iPhone, it's very easy to find the Hindi, the Devanagari script just by clicking on thing. And so now I write in Hindi every day to people, which, they translate. So, acha. Coming to what Prithvi was asking, Prithvi naam aapne kaha shayad, is it no? Yeah. Is most उन पर आंसर कर दूँ थोड़ा जल्दी से मुझे लगा कि what you're suggesting as your problem or how to find the balance, the fact that you're asking that question is itself an indication that you're in the right place, boss. You know what I'm saying? But you're saying कि how to be myself but yet pay attention to the public. I thought that's the right balance. I teach a book called A Woman in Berlin, which is an account of a woman's experience in Berlin after Stalin's army came in. ठीक है? It's a tragic, horrible account. But her intelligence in the ordinary things just shines through so beautifully that it's partly about herself, but it's really about the world. You get a sense with a sharp imprint of her own personality and yet also for observation of the world. And I think that's what you are really poised, because sometimes when students, for example, ask me such questions and they seem to be posing ethical objections to what they are going to do, मुझे लगता है कि ठीक ही तो है. You have these ethical objections and yet you must do the work. Go ahead and do it while asking yourself this question, and your work therefore will be much more textured because you have this consciousness. So I think you're just at the right place. I mean, I'm sorry to sound like Prithvi, तुम जो करोगे ठीक करोगे. मगर that is where you are, boss. With the last words to do. I think I also happen to believe, by the way, that Doab tells the foreword of a sort, not forward, a preface of a sort, the introduction, actually explains, you're talking about the articulation of what one is doing. वो बहुत fit है. भाई, your dissatisfaction with non-fiction of a particular kind, or also saying that, he says at the end that non-fiction, when it delivers too much information, is dissatisfying to him. He's interested in fiction. Our friend here is. So ये भी मुझे लगा is an important point about ways of telling, where information overload is not what you need. You need something else. And I always remember Albert Camus saying that what you love, you have to talk about it lightly. That wonderful note, if we always remember, is a wonderful thing about how to practice one's art and how to be telling. अच्छा, यहाँ पर मैं समाप्त करता हूँ. आप कुछ चंद शब्द बोलने.
This was an extremely rare honor to be in this situation. Like, thanks to suitable agency, all of you with the Himali, Amber, putting it like such a lovely and others thing together is just fantastic. And it's just such a welcoming, to come here and to have this sort of privilege to be part of this world, and I hope this continues. These little traditions that some of the older traditions are gone. एक तो half of like forest का ऊपर का thing is closed now. Much of those places which are familiar to us are being shut down, and like the city has become much more like staid and it is a mainstream. This is like this. We call it like my colleague Julia Hauser calls it the moral outcome of a pandemic. लोग morality बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाता है. Virtues they become virtues somehow. And some of these things they have happened, and we really need to kind of break out of that and start again meeting people. This city is all about people. I'm not homocentric, but I still love people. But so it's just fantastic. Thank you very much.